one of those places. And so I'll talk a little bit about that faith basis and how that is really quite profound and very meaningful with tons of purpose. I'll talk about the mission and vision because we all need mission and vision, and you'll get a sense of what this school and what this program is aiming to do and has done. And then I'm using the 5 great self-declared goals of Jesus of Nazareth according to the Gospel of Luke. And those 5 are: proclaim the good news to the poor. You probably recite them with me. Proclaim freedom for the prisoner. Proclaim recovery of sight for the blind. To set free the oppressed, and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor, the Jubilee. Next slide, please. So this is my friend, Dr. Charles Mully. We're sitting, I developed a fabulous relationship with Charles. Charles and Esther and I would have our breakfast, lunch, and supper every day outside in this outside cafeteria, this outside dining room in January, February. It was 30 degrees, lots of mangoes, fresh fish, and bananas. And we got to know each other very, very well. Charles is just over 70, so he and I had a lot in common together, given that we've all are entering into our 70th decade together. So that's Charles. He's having his coffee across the street. Next slide, across the table is his dear wife, Esther, of some, I don't know, 60 years. No, that wouldn't be right, about 50 years. And between the two, they've given birth to 7 children and raised 7 children, most of whom are now involved with the Mully Children's Family, despite the huge resistance that they had when Charles announced that he was going to give up his businesses, and his children were horrified. But they're now mostly involved with the Mully Children's Family. And I've met 5 out of the 7, and they're wonderful. They're just wonderful, vibrant young people. This is where the program started in the East. Remember, nothing good comes from the East. Remember that phrase? And what happened was that the boys, he would find them in the morning when he was in the West, in Eldoret. They were sleeping and they weren't learning. And he was teaching them. And he said, "What's the matter with you people?" He says, you're half asleep. And he says, "Well, you know, we go back to the streets at night." "I beg your pardon?" "Well, I go back to the streets at night because it's easier there. And my friends are there. And then I sneak back here at 5 o'clock in the morning, get to have a couple of hours sleep and go to school and have breakfast." Well, Charles is thinking, well, this isn't working very well. So he had this property, this tiny little property on the other side of Nairobi in Delaney. And it's there he discovered that he had this little house. So he moved over with the first class of boys, and I met one of them, and I'll talk about David in a minute. Moved with the first class of boys, the boys first, and they lived in Charles and Esther lived in that little hut, and the boys were on the left, and then when the girls came up, they had a compound on the right, and they were about 100 feet away, 150 feet away on either side of that house. There's no glass in the windows because Charles and Esther said, "We got to know what's going on in the square in the middle of the night." And so they kept an eye on these children, and the children thought that Charles had eyes in the back of his head and never slept. So this is where it started. He decided to keep that house because of its historical and nostalgic sense. It's now a warehouse. What happened was that Charles and Esther were away on some trip, and the children took one look at this house and said, "We can't live in here. It's falling down." And it is. You look at the cracks on it. And so what he did is he moved it. He moved all their furniture into the guest house, which is the building on the right, which is where I stayed. In the back, in 2 rooms, not much bigger than the room I had, in 2 rooms, and that's where Esther and Charles live. The identity of Mully Children's Family is very carefully thought about and very carefully crafted. And as it starts off, it's Christian based. But I'll tell you a little bit more about that sense of Christian based. This is not a church. This is not a religious institution. It is one that is inspired by the values of the gospel, and those values are lived and taught and experienced by everyone in the compound, from Charles all the way through to the youngest baby in the organization. So it's not like a church. It doesn't have a sense of having any priest or someone in charge. Everything is done with empowerment. And that, as you see, is the second bullet in there. And they believe to empower that every person, every single person, has the potential to be all that God has created to become. And all we have to do is create the right environment in order to facilitate that. And that is the focus and the religious grounding, or the spiritual grounding, that is ground so much in the Gospels. Healthy family, and by healthy, he doesn't just mean spiritual health, he means physical health and educational health. Accountable, one of the things that is endemic to developing countries, and maybe a little bit in our countries, is a little hint of corruption appears from time to time. And one of the things that he has decided long ago, that his sense of integrity, what he says he does, what he believes he does, what he feels he does, there's integrity across all of that. When he has contracts out for lots of construction, he does everything by tender. I looked at the business practices that he was doing and where's Bill? Bill's somewhere here. Bill would know about this. He and I, and maybe many of you know about it. You study when you get into senior positions in the military and the government. You study, how to reduce risk, fraud, supply chain issues, theft, those kinds of issues. And Charles Mulley's team gave a briefing to an American team while I was there, and I was astounded that I was hearing things that you might hear at staff school all the time. It was a modern, first-class, world-class organization with integrity and honesty and accountable. Commissioned by Jesus, they believe deeply that Jesus has called them to provide this service and to do this work. And they believe that they are in the business of transforming people in a holistic way. And they transform not only the children, but all the employees, and indeed the guests arrive, and they have this sense of change, sense of hope in the world of brokenness and hopelessness. That's their identity. Next slide, please. This sign is all over the campus, hanging up, and it's practice. It's not, we get these mission and vision statements, and you stick them on the wall. And after the first week or so, you probably haven't read it in months. But these are spoken about frequently to the children and in the worship services. And the mission is to follow Jesus Christ in the transforming the lives of children, young people, and marginalized people of the society. It's a sense of, we want to rebuild Kenya one child at a time. Next slide, please. So this is the choir, and the music program, and the Bible studies, and the assemblies, and the chaplains that are there, and the social workers are there. They're all geared to proclaim the good news to the poor, the good news to the poor. When I would wake up in the morning at 7 o'clock in the morning, I would hear choirs of young people. Remember, there's 1,200 young people around me. I would hear the choirs of young people practicing at 7 o'clock in the morning. And you'd hear a snippet over there and a snippet over here. I go to bed at night, when I retire about 7 or 8 o'clock at night, as it's dark in Kenya at that point, I would hear the choirs singing and young people singing these amazing hymns some of whom, like Lord is my shepherd, that I've known since I was a child. Very, very powerful, and you could hear it all the time to proclaim the good news to the poor. Well, who are the poor? Well, let's take a look at a slide that you've already seen. Next slide. There it is. So this is the poor. This is a church in, let me get it right, Githurai or Githagoro? Githurai. This is in Githurai, which is a suburb of Nairobi. And I was there to feed, and at St. David and St. Martin had a couple suitcases of stuff that we were giving away, and we gave a whole bunch of stuff to these people here. And you look carefully, you can see the faces are not all that great, and the clothing is terrible. And you see this young man in the middle with his with the blue, or the, what's he got, a red sweater on. And if you look carefully, you see he's holding a water bottle. In that water bottle, not water, it's glue. And he and all of his friends are sucking the glue and sucking the fumes off that glue on a regular basis. So when they were talking to me, asking things like, oh, Reverend George, how can you put me in your suitcase and take me to Canada? They were breathing out all this smell of airplane glue. This is the poor. Next slide, please. And this is a sign of the young people. These are kindergarten to grade 5 group. And you can see that there's joy, and there's life, and there's smiles, and there's meaning. These children were rescued out of the same place as the glue sniffers that I had met the couple weeks before. Same setting, same rescue area, rescue field. Next slide. So one of the things that I was supposed to do was to proclaim good news to the poor. So we had morning assemblies every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And what you see there is it'd be about 400 high school students in front of me. And my job was to give words of encouragement every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And I didn't know I was supposed to do that until I arrived. But we got along like house on fire. And it was just an amazing experience because they listened. I would tell them something, and the next day I would run into students who said, oh, Reverend George, that word you used, perseverance. I really believe in that. I've been thinking about what you said about perseverance all day long. I said, well, that's pretty good perseverance. So that was pretty good. To see children and youth and marginalized members of society lead dignified livelihood. So this is what I mean. They're not a church. They're not trying to create Christians or followers of Jesus, or they just live the church. They are the church, but their job is to help these people become dignified, contributing leaders in a country that is crawling out from some of the worst poverty that you'd ever seen. Next slide, please. Freedom for the prisoners. I chose this picture because they don't look like prisoners to me. They look free, absolutely free. One of the things that happened as they got to know me is that, and it didn't take long, I would be walking through the compound and I'd sit down or something like that. Next thing I know, 30 children would come around. And they'd start asking me all kinds of questions like, how much snow do you have to go through in Canada today? And what kinds of what kinds of animals have you got? Do you have giraffes? Do you eat chicken? What do you have chickens in your backyard? So I was getting questions like that, and then they tell me their stories, and they weren't afraid. They were free. They were absolutely free. So it was an experience of a real sense of joy and connection with people I had never met before, who were very young, who were free to come and talk to me and ask me personal questions and tell me their stories. Next slide, please. So over on the left, you got a rescue situation. One of the things that Mully does is that he has a program in which he sends out workers, healthcare workers, out to the community to a list of very impoverished people in that area around Delaney. And this is one of them. This is kind of, I forgot her name. Penny, Penelope. Is that the right pronunciation? Penelope, that's it. Yeah, Penelope. So this is Penelope. She's lame. She's what, 25 to 30. Her husband is off trying to find work somewhere else out of the area because there's no work there. You see a little bit of corn, which she grows in order to have a little bit of food. If you look carefully at her house, this is her house. And it doesn't get any worse than this. This is rural poverty that's just desperate. If you look in that house, you'll see the little hole in the bottom. You can't see it from where you're sitting, but there's a chicken there because that's one of the ways she gets her protein and her eggs. And if you look at the green door, there's a little girl peering out there. And Penelope asked me in Swahili if I would be kind enough to rescue her last born daughter and take her to Mully Children's Family as a rescue child. The reason she asked that is that her second last born is already at Mully Children's Family as a rescue child. Doesn't get any worse than that. So that's a rescue situation. Here you see the evening group of about 300 or 400 students in the chapel who are worshiping and doing presentations, and that's part of the rehabilitation program. And then we run into David, who's reintegrated. David is 40 in this picture. Some 30 years ago, he was a boy in Eldoret, and he was one of the first. He was the first class of boys that came from Eldoret to Delaney, and he says, "I hated Delaney. I just hated it. There was nothing there. Remember, nothing good comes from the east." He says it's very cold or very hot, very dry. There's no good food. There was terrible water. We were living in these shacks, and he said I would try to run away. And I get down the street, and boys would run away and girls would run away all the time. But Charles would go and find them and bring them home. And he'd say, "David, where are you going?" "Well, I can't stand it here. There's no food." He said, "Well, God will provide. We'll get food. It'll be okay. Where are you going to go?" "Well, I want family. I want connection." "Well, what am I going to do?" "Well, come back and give us another, week or so and see how you feel after that." So Charles would invite them back and they'd come back. David is now a PhD student studying psychology. He is a government consult for NGOs from outside Kenya who want to start rescue programs for children in Kenya and Tanzania. And that's what he does for a living. And he wants to be a child psychologist. He's now studying his PhD to do that. And that's a little story about that. David just arrived and he started telling me the story. And then I didn't know, but Charles had come up behind us and was sort of sitting there. And David suddenly smiled and laughed. He says, "If it wasn't for you, Daddy Mully, I'd be dead." And they all burst out laughing. A real sense of camaraderie. And they laughed like Africans can laugh. This deep, joyous laugh that I'm not dead. I'm alive. And I have so much to live for. This is David. Next slide, please. This is Juliet. Juliet, she is free from coming from an amazing story. At the age of 16, another Mully rescue beneficiary spotted her and recognized her and referred her to MCF. So there it is, proclaiming good news to the poor. So that, this graduate of Mully spotted her and proclaimed good news. Doesn't have to be like this way, Juliet. Juliet's 16, and she has two babies, one 3, yes, 3, and one 1. So she delivered her first baby when she's 13 from an act of defilement, which is not uncommon. So she's rescued with these babies. She graduates from high school, and she decides she wants to become a master carpenter. And I met her, and calm, quiet, and she was working on the wood with a sensitivity in her hands, and you could tell that she was feeling the wood and knowing the wood and working with the wood in her hands. This is Juliet. And she's one of 5 mothers. One of the things that Charles Mulley insists on is that if you're a girl and you're pregnant, you will not be penalized. You will not lose your education or your capacity. So he's created a system by which mothers like Juliet can raise their children in a separate compound, and during the day, her children go to a daycare program in the school. Next slide, please. Stephen was a prisoner and a victim of AIDS. His parents died when he was a very young man. At the age of 12, he's looking after 2 brothers. He, like Charles, learned how to live on the streets with garbage and living under trucks to keep out of the rain. He's rescued at 16. This picture last January, Stephen is 18. It took him 6 months or so to adjust, because I would ask that question, what's it like for you to come from the streets to here? And I get all sorts of stories, but his is, it took him 6 months. He didn't know what to do here. He's never experienced anything like this. These people loved him. These people looked after him. He was waiting for the next shoe to fall and someone to come and get him and hurt him. He wasn't. 6 months later, Stephen sort of discovers himself, discovers he's safe, and his mind started to show he was a brilliant physicist. And he became the top physics student in the school at the time, and he wants a career in medicine. I'd go to him. Next slide, please. This is Ruth. Ruth is an astounding young woman. She's the last born of 3, 2 other girls. Her mother, this is a prisoner of poverty. Mother was abandoned with these 3 children, and she had to trade sex for food and for school fees. So Ruth had a chance to have a place to live and go to school. Ruth is sexually assaulted because she's left in the care of her grandfather, and grandfather assaults her at the age of 4. Mother turns grandfather in, grandfather goes to jail, and Ruth is rescued with her siblings by MCF. She arrived there, and within days, she discovered that MCF was a guardian angel. She felt safe. She had food. She had clothing, shoes, and she became a very active leader, very active there in faith and music. And she wants to be a lawyer and fight for women's rights. Next slide, please. Recovery of sight for the blind. I picked this slide. How are we doing? We okay for time? Okay, well, we aren't going to finish today at 11:30. This slide, I picked that slide because I wanted to demonstrate that these are the grades 7 and 8 outside their home. And this is where they have, they look after their laundry and look after themselves. And I want you to take a quick memory of that group of trees, because recovery of sight for the blind is tied to their agriculture and the trees. Next slide, please. Charles Mulley planted 5 million trees in this area in order to change the climate. McGill University gave him a PhD as a result of this transformation of this land. This is a picture of the trees that he had planted some 15 years ago in Yatta. Because people said to him, there's no way you can grow food in the east. I mean, nothing good comes from the east. It's too dry. So he changed the climate to conserve water and created what I would say, he showed the blind how to see, become a very prosperous agricultural area as a result of this work. Next slide, please. So you can see that he's got a state-of-the-art pump house. The building, looks typically shaky, but it's very functional, and the water system is very functional. State-of-the-art water purity system that he has, which is on the right hand, and then they pump it up into a tower, so you have water pressure and all the conveniences that you would find in the West with potable, clean water. He created this system, and now the neighborhood, all the people, he teaches them about good water, the importance of fresh water, the importance of clean water. They come and they get his water, and in doing so, there's been a 40% reduction in gastrointestinal problems as a result of bad water in that whole area. Next slide, please. He wanted to know how to grow vegetables. He now grows enough vegetables to feed the entire school, some 1,200 kids, plus schools all around the area. And he does it in these greenhouses, which come from Israel. Israel, of course, is known for water conservation system. And I was going to say about that. And there's 17 acres. He grows enough French beans that he has a lucrative trade with Belgium on selling French beans from this endeavor. Fish ponds. How do you get omega-3s into young minds, young brains? How do you do that? You need fish. Fish is too expensive. So instead of buying fish, he said, well, why don't I grow my own fish? Put in 5 fish ponds, and they harvest these fish ponds every week. And as a result, you get they get fresh fish every Friday. To set the oppressed free, I mentioned the child care program, because no woman should be penalized because they become pregnant and lose their opportunity for education. That is not going to happen under my watch, says Charles Mulley. This is a state-of-the-art child care program building that he has put into Yatta, where the college is, the college. Next slide, please. This, of course, you've seen this slide before, one of my favorite slides. I had a chance to snap this in the college area. These are college kids. Again, it's cheaper to build my own college than it is to send all these children to college, because he follows the children after they graduate to their highest level of achievement in order to make sure that they can make a living on their own, integrated back into the Kenyan society. And so he pays out lots of fees. So, well, why don't I build my own college? So he built his own college, and these are students at that college. The girl on the right is not mother. It turns out that she is the helper to mother. Mother's, you can't see her very well, but she's tucked over on the left. And brand new baby. And what they do is they pair up like sisters, and they have someone assisting mother all the time, so that no mother is alone as they grow through the postpartum process. Next slide, please. This is a hospital that he wants to build and is in the process of building, because it's 2.5 hours either way to the nearest hospital. And he says, it's just unacceptable. I said, you know, my children get sick and they get injured, or they have babies, or the maternity. What am I going to do? It's too far away for that. So he said, well, I guess I'm going to build my own hospital. I figure, he says, if I depended on the government of Kenya to do that, my great-grandchildren might see a hospital in this area. There's restoring sight to the blind and releasing the oppressed. Next slide. To proclaim the year of the Jubilee, the year of the Lord's favor, is a constant that goes on all the time with music and worship. As I said, it's integral to the rehabilitation program that they have at MCF. And so what you see here is inside the chapel. Next slide. This is Jeffrey. Jeffrey was a beneficiary. Jeffrey's story is astounding. Jeffrey was abandoned to his aunt when he's a tiny baby. Aunt doesn't like Jeffrey. Boys are not very popular, because boys, if you don't have land, you can't do anything with them. Girls, you can get a dowry with, so you're going to hang on to the girls, but the boys are a real problem. And so the aunt decided to get rid of Jeffrey. But Jeffrey was rescued by his grandmother, I think. Yeah, his grandmother, because she was about to stuff Jeffrey down a pit latrine and drown him. So, which is not that common, but it happens. He arrived, he's pretty well dead when he arrived at MCF, malnutrition, disease. They didn't think he was going to live, but he did. He thrived. He became part of the first class of high school students at Delaney. Jeffrey went on to teach history and business at MCF, both at Yatta and at Delaney. And he turned down a scholarship. And he said, why did you turn down a scholarship? He said, well, you know, the good Lord will always give me another chance. There'll always be other scholarships, but I want to stay here and give back. This is his young protege, because they have this constant flow of looking after each other. Next slide. This is the end of the sermon. But this short little piece give you a bit of a feel of what it's like to go worship there. Sunday morning, opening hymn, and this is what it sounds like. So now let us, the body of Christ, give credit to God, the Creator, God the Holy Spirit, for three great gifts: the companionship of heaven, the power of creation, and the humility of our gratitude. And we do this as is most appropriate as we pass it from one generation to the next. Amen.